Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. It has been our endeavor to help our students navigate through the civil services examination in general and personality test 2021 in particular. In this series of talk, we invite eminent personalities, scholars, academicians, institution builders, administrators to interact and share their views with you. In this context, today we have a very distinguished guest, and we are really honored to introduce him, Padma Shri Professor Dr. Pushpesh Pant sir, an eminent scholar of international relations, a world acclaimed food critic, and a very regular columnist in the Forbes, Outlook, Times of India, so on and so forth. He was awarded Padma Shri in 2016. And if you prepare for IAS examination, reading International Relations by Pushpesh Pant is mandatory. Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. Sir, let's start with the first question. That is the climate accord, climate negotiations. How would you distinguish between pre-Trump era and post-Trump era and its impact on India and the future of such accords?
I think is a very, very important landmark turning point as far as climate change negotiations are concerned. Trump was a very anti-science man who thought climate change science was a fiction, myth, fantasy. He thought it was a conspiracy hatched by developing nations to retard American development, and he did not believe in it. And he walked out of the Paris Accord, which was a Conference of Parties meeting. After America walked out of it, the accord ceased to have any meaning at all. And Biden had made it very clear that he would rejoin the climate change negotiations and ratify the Paris Accord, whatever it was worth, and rejoin. Now, once America rejoins, there is a new life breathed into the Paris Accord. And everybody says that America is now serious about following a timeline. It takes it the global crisis matching COVID crisis. And I think the impact is going to be good. Other countries would join it. China has already announced that by 2035 they would have a zero emission of carbon. Whether they do it or don't do it, they have reduced the target by 0.5 degrees centigrade in pre-industrial days, etc. But as far as India is concerned, it will definitely open the avenues for India to participate constructively and contribute constructively in climate change negotiations.
A very distinct personality, that is Culinary Skills. And regarding your being a food critic, lots of students, they write in their hobbies that cooking is their hobby.
I think that is not very sensible to write cooking as hobby unless you really know, otherwise you'll be cooking your goose. My advice would be that anybody who writes cooking as his or her hobby should have enough interest in cooking to at least differentiate between different styles of Indian cuisine, whether it is Tamil, whether it is Kannadiga, whether it is Malayali, and sub-streams therein, Punjabi, Tandoori, etc. But you should know basics of cooking, otherwise you will get caught in an interview.
So that means when you write something in your column, you should mean it.
Oh, most certainly. I would say not only about culinary things. Even if you write your hobby as gardening, you should know something about gardening. You just can't, if you write about my hobby is reading, you just can't say I read books. I mean, what kinds of books you like reading, fiction, non-fiction, related to your interview and so on and so forth. So I think it is necessary to have a genuine interest, and even if you haven't had a genuine interest so far, I would very strongly advise candidates to cultivate an interest between prelims and mains and the interview in a genuine hobby.
Sir, now coming back to international relations, it's a very dynamic portion of civil services examination. Now there is a very recent coup in Myanmar, and where this Aung San Suu Kyi was arrested or ousted from power. How do you see it as an impact on India?
I think it's going to be pretty complicated because A, it is not a coup which has happened just day before yesterday or the last week. Army has been in power ever since it had the original coup in 1962. And when Aung San Suu Kyi became the state councillor, apparently she was an important position holder. She could not be the president because she was married to a foreigner, a British citizen. But the power behind the curtain was still being wielded by the army. So the army has not done something which was not expected. They were the holders of power. They are the wielders of power. The problem which India has is that it is a proximate country. Our internal security in the northeastern region is involved with that. Many of the insurgents take refuge in Burma. There is a problem of Rohingya refugees coming to Bangladesh, flowing over to India. But we still have to worry about our national interest. We have to worry about having a relationship with whoever is ruling. We have to have a relationship which is a workable relationship to look after our borders as well. At the same time, we have to worry that the China doesn't take advantage of this latest instability. We hadn't been a very ardent supporter of Aung San Suu Kyi ever. So Aung San Suu Kyi has always been a little reluctant to come out gushing towards India. Except one person, George Fernandez, in a much earlier regime, nobody came out in open support to the Burmese students, rebels and so on. So India has maintained a technical balance, a tightrope act. I think that will continue.
So there will not be any significant impact on
Indo-Myanmarese relationships.
Right, sir. Sir, of late we are seeing a great discussion on growth, development versus environment, and you have protagonists and antagonists for that. Like Trump administration withdrew from Paris Accord, but Biden administration says no, we are going to enter into it. So in India, so far as policymakers are concerned, how to strike a balance between developmental aspirations and environmental concerns?
I think this is a very complicated question, but we might as well start at the beginning. There is actually no debate between development and environment. There has to be sustainable development which doesn't damage environment to an extent that it becomes unsustainable. That's one part. And unfortunately, what happened during Trump's era was, Trump was, if I may use the word, a harsh word, was a Luddite. He was an anti-science person. His relationship with science was always very tendentious. So what he would say climate change is false science. It is a conspiracy against America. But we should not forget that development in America is very different from development in a developing country like India. So we are years, generations behind the development of West. And we should not forget that the development of West took place at our cost. Our resources were taken away. They were the primary guilty party in carbon emissions. And right now they are using the environmental, shall we say, issue to retard development of countries like China and India. The argument becomes a little more complicated because if you talk in terms of climate change, which we might do a little length later, or we talk in terms of carbon emissions, we talk of global warming, and then the guilty parties are China and India, who because of their large population are largest gross emitters of these carbon emissions in the atmosphere. But at the same time, we forget that the per capita accounting, the Americans and the Europeans are far worse guilty parties in this case. So the issue becomes very complicated. Fossil fuels versus, we might be having very good control of our fossil fuels like coals, like China. And we would say that why should we not use our natural resources for our economic development unless we are compensated for going to clean energy resources. So there is this basic conflict of interest between the developed West, Americans in particular, and the developing world.
Sir, as a civil services aspirant, if this question is asked, particularly with respect to this flash flood that took place in Uttarakhand, and that was so many power plants, so many dams were devastated, so many people died, how a student should answer this?
This again is one of those tricky questions because the Chief Minister of Uttarakhand said, don't go by the news of the disaster, natural calamity, development cannot stop. At the same time, all this development activity has been taking place against the advice of the geologists, all the experts, all the scientists. There is a clash even in India, especially in Uttarakhand, in Himachal Pradesh, in Northeast also, between developmental activities and fragile ecosystem. Now everybody agrees that Himalayas are a young mountain chain, they are very fragile, they are always in a move, and if you have large scale blasting, if you have tunneling through the mountains, you are making them hollow, and sooner or later the debris will raise the level of the riverbed, and this is a very steep V-shaped valley. So there is a seismic prone zone. So also glaciers have been receding. So you have lakes being formed, you have waters flushing down. So all this combines to make a very deadly thing. But the sad part is there is no political party which doesn't want development. I remember the instance a few years back when the Congress Chief Minister then, Mr. Harish Rawat in Uttarakhand, came out with a BJP leader of opposition to petition the central government the development work should continue and it should not be stopped. So there has to be a general awareness among the people and to put pressure on their representatives that this development can only be disastrous.
In this recent pandemic, COVID-19, that actually was a kind of, you can say, once in a century affair, how do you see its impact on this global climate negotiations and this such treaties that we have?
I think, Dr. Jha, what has happened is something very, very tragic. because the COVID was a pandemic, as you said, once in a century event, maybe even more. And you had the whole world grappling with it. The world came to a standstill, economic activity. People were dying in hundreds and thousands in developed countries like America. In United Kingdom, you had people infected, which ran into millions. So nobody thought that there was a greater crisis. But we forgot that climate change is a ticking time bomb. We might win our battle, hope we do, with the vaccines with COVID-19. But if we allow the tipping point to be crossed about climate change, there is no hope for survival for human race.
So we have to be more concerned about this and more aware about this climate change, which has been supported by science. We should not negate it.
And actually there are some people who argue with good reason that the COVID-19 took such a tragic, disastrous shape, dimension, because we had neglected the climate change. So the erosion of biodiversity, vectors shifting from one species to humans, this jumping of the virus, probably two things contributed to it. Unplanned, unchecked globalization, which allowed people to travel in real time, which virus could allow to multiply many more times. But I think we have to recognize that it is not a problem which we can leave for the next generation.
So globalization help there was also instrumental or acted as a catalyst.
Because the interdependence of countries like China, countries in ASEAN, even China and America, China and India, there was such an intermeshing of our economic interests that people traveled. People traveled for conferences, they traveled for meetings, they went to sign deals and so on. And everybody carried a bit of a virus, and some countries were hit very badly.
So, but sir, if I am a student and I am asked a counter question that what should be then the stance of India? Like, should we go for deglobalization, or we should continue with globalization with certain checks and balances or something like that?
India's position has always been globalization with the human face, and the present Prime Minister obviously has been emphasizing self-reliance and Atmanirbharta, made in India, make for the world in India and so on. So the whole idea is to depend on and reduce your dependence on countries like China or anybody else. But unfortunately it is easier said than done, because the supply chains have been so closely intermeshed. But what we should realize, there can be no economic development which is sustainable unless we cope with the coronavirus, unless we lift the lockout. But there has to be a very tricky balance. You have to use a vaccine rollout which is effective, efficient, credible. You also have to economic activity picked up again, and you have to worry about, you can't turn the clock back. But globalization, rampant, was basically an American project. So you have to make a change. The developing countries have always had a problem with the globalization project. They have had Doha round problems. They have asked for compensations and things of that kind. That will continue.
So in globalization with human face, that should be our policy.
And in the context of what India requires to be done. You see, India's position, Dr. Shah, is quite interesting. It is not quite a least developing nation. It is not quite the developed nation. It is an emerging nation, a regional presence, capabilities in vaccine production. The whole world is looking to the Serum Institute of India and our vaccines produced by other companies in India to save them. So I think India's position is somewhere between the superpowers, the major powers, and somebody which is very close to the threshold of being a major power. So we have to balance in the context of our requirements.
Sir, with regards to this climate change, what role you find for the private sector? Because we are now delegating or allocating more functions to private sector. Government is becoming facilitator.
I have no problems with that, as long as the private sector is conscious of its social responsibility. Take an example like the Mahindra Group. They have gone into the electrical cars, electrical vehicles now. So if Tata soon might do that, others might follow. So there are people, India is in the forefront of the Global Solar Alliance. Unfortunately, what we referred to is the run-of-the-river mini micro hydel projects would have been cleaner energy. But the point is, we will have to shift from fossil fuels to cleaner energy. It could be wind power, Prime Minister has referred to. We have a solar alliance, and we have electrical cars. But electrical cars are only pushing the problem one step behind, because electricity has to be generated, either hydroelectrical generation or thermal generation or nuclear generation. So or even solar power. So the efficiency in recent past is increased greatly of the solar photovoltaic cells. So I think that the Indian private sector rises up to the challenge and opts for, and it is not going to be unprofitable for that sector. If they are pioneers like Elon Musk, you can make money out of electrical vehicles.
So, as a civil servant, what is his role you see? I have two part of this question. One is as an IFS officer, when a civil servant opts for Indian Foreign Service and he has to deal with global, you can say, leaders, and as an IAS officer.
The two answers are quite different. A young IFS officer would normally be required to be a good communicator, because for the first 10-15 years of his life, he would not be reaching a level of a head of a mission. He would not be negotiating on his own. And the multilateral negotiations being what they are, the IFS officer, even at the level of the head of the mission, is a facilitator. The negotiations would be done by the Prime Minister or the Environment Minister and things of that kind. So he would be basically carrying a brief, defending India's position in United Nations or in the country where they are posted, trying to remove irritants and have areas of coincidence of interest highlighted. But IAS officer is a very different case. The IAS would probably be holding a charge of a district which is of the size of a European country, probably after 5-6 years of training. And there he is also responsible to his superiors, but he is independently in charge of a huge mass of humanity, a geographical territory, and he is responsible to the elected representative of the people also, not only the MLAs and MPs, the district level, the panchayat level, the second 3 tiers of self-governance, and he has to coordinate all the activities. So even if we are talking of environment, the young DM who's in Haridwar, Mr. Rawat I think, and the DM who's looking after Chamoli have to coordinate their activities practically cut off from the rest of the world. There is a Kumbh Mela taking place in Haridwar. The downstream flow of water might reach anywhere. They can take precautions, but they can't create a stampede. So I think the young IAS officer has to be far more independent and competent to take responsibility courageously and stand up to an order which he thinks is politically motivated. There have been issues like that. People have resigned from civil service, people have not resigned, they have been transferred 21 times in 2 years and things of that kind. But there have been very good, successful pushbacks also. So it is not as if the politicians are all corrupt and they always look down on an IAS officer, but I think the IAS officer carries on his shoulders, to my mind, a burden far greater than a young IFS officer of his same batch.
And what about common citizen? You have to suggest something to the common citizen and your expectations from them.
I think that there is a very old phrase about that. People get the kind of government they deserve. If we at the level of individuals want our self-interest to be protected, put up with corruption, put up with political interference, our own partisanship, then we can't expect a government which will give us policies which are sustainable in terms of climate, which are effective in terms of fighting with the COVID virus or generating employment or economic development.
Great. Thank you, sir. Now, sir, again coming back to this area of international relations, this Biden administration, and which was inaugurated on January 20th, how do you see Biden administration vis-a-vis India or Indo-US relationship? Any shift you see, sir? Positive, negative?
I don't think there is a question of a very major shift, because India is such a large country, such a large market, such a workforce of skilled labor and so on, that you cannot wish away India. You can't airbrush it from the global politics. But there are going to be few hiccups in the morning, because I think India had gone wholeheartedly up ki baar Trump Sarkar, and there had been a fantastic reception for Modi ji in Madison Square. Trump came to India and had Namaste Modi, Namaste Trump, which was a large jamghat of human beings. So I think there is a little resistance to India even otherwise. The Republicans seem to be a little more tolerant because they don't follow a particularly active dynamic policy of America's manifest destiny. But the point is that Americans cannot do without India in the present context at all. They have a trade war against China. They don't have a very comfortable relationship with Putin's Russia. After Brexit, one doesn't know how the economic relationship in Anglosphere is going to take place. So I think India, there was a great speculation that Biden has not talked to Modi, Biden has not talked to Modi. They have talked. And these things, a great country is not, their interests are not in conflict or correspondence, because the body chemistry, physical chemistry of the two leaders meets. Ultimately is the national interest. And I think Americans have a major interest in India.
Now, sir, if contentious questions are asked regarding environment, regarding international relations, which a student perhaps is not aware of how to answer that question directly, then what would be your suggestion, the art of handling such questions in personality boards?
I think the best honesty is the best policy. If there is a question which you know nothing about, it is much more sensible to say, I'm afraid at the moment the answer escapes me. I don't remember this, or I'm not aware of this. You ask me these questions and I come a little prepared by refreshing my memory. If you ask me a difficult question about climate change and say, what was the Kyoto Protocol? Now the student preparing for IAS is supposed to know that in 1992, there was a United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was supported by the Kyoto Protocol a couple of years later, which was the principle of equal but differentiated responsibilities, which allowed the way for carbon exchange. And then you come to the Paris summit, which is not quite a summit but a conference of parties in 2015, where hundreds of countries agreed on a certain timeline. So those major landmarks, nobody has an excuse to say, I don't know of it. And nobody is there to rag a candidate. He can be asked a difficult question. But if it's a difficult, complicated question, you probably honestly say that I don't remember it at the moment. Perhaps it has to do with carbon exchange. But if he remembers, differentiated equal responsibilities are there. And then of course, you could say carbon exchange. Later on you could come to Paris and say its significance was this, a timeline was agreed. The problem was that it was, when Trump walked out of it, it became meaningless. So you could talk in terms of that. You could even say that the climate change conversation had become even topical earlier. If you did not know the exact answer, you would say the story is much too long to condense in a short answer. It starts with the International Panel on Climate Change getting a Nobel Prize when Mr. Pachauri was heading the panel. You could talk about those things, but stay with your strengths. But honesty is the best policy. Don't try to bluff around.
Don't guess, don't bluff.
Don't guess, don't bluff.
Oh, great, sir. Great. That is a great tip. Now, sir, you have been associated with UPSC also. I cannot divulge those things, but in different capacities. What would be your suggestion for an aspirant, like who is appearing for mains examination? There are three types of students, sir. One who has just decided to prepare. Second is writing mains but couldn't qualify, and third is who is in the final stage. Do you have three advices or?
No, I think the only advice I have for all candidates for UPSC is that UPSC probably is the only institution in India which is perfectly credible, transparent, above board. I mean, without the prejudice to any other institution. I think the copies are marked with absolute objectivity. There is good moderation. Keys given for questions are very carefully prepared, and top experts are involved with marking the answer sheets. So I do not think that a person who is even taking UPSC casually should do that casually, because if he prepares hard enough, it's very, very possible that a person who is going to drop out after prelim or one attempt or two attempt, he should think that is a great career opportunity. It's not only IAS and IFS, it's IPS, customs, defense services, whole lot of things. So you probably plan for 2 years at least, and don't think that is a lottery which has not worked in your favor. Hard work always plays, and hard work is fairly evaluated at the UPSC.
Hard work, and don't take it casually.
Strong motivation. Don't blame the UPSC for what you have not done.
What about, sir, this medium issue? Like there are so many students who are selected, few students from Hindi medium. How Hindi medium students can actually work on that?
I don't think it's a problem of the Hindi medium students. The problem is that most people who say, my mother tongue I find more comfortable, when you see their copies, you realize that they're not very comfortable in their mother tongue either. You know, I remember students, not necessarily UPSC, but even at JNU where I used to teach, nobody could write in Hindi the correct Indira Gandhi. They would say Indra plus Aki Matra, Indira Gandhi. So obviously a person not even knowing the elementary spellings of a Hindi can expect that he can express himself in his mother tongue better than in English. And then in most subjects the terminology is English oriented, science, environment, economics, and how many of the people who are appearing in their mother tongue, let's say Hindi, would remember GDP is Sakal Rashtriya Utpad, and then you say negative growth, then you say recession, then you have Mandi, then you have inflation. What do? Then you say Mudrasfiti. The problem is not the medium. The problem is the person using the medium.
Right, sir. So there is no discrimination on the basis of language actually.
See, what happens, Dr. Jha, is that at the school level, we undervalue languages. We say that your marks count for PCME. E is still there, H is not there. The third language doesn't count. But same applies to Malayalam, applies to Tamil, applies to Kannada, applies to Bengali. Probably students going through the Malayalam medium and the Bengali medium have a stronger base in their expression, because there has been a tradition. the Kerala Sahitya Vigyan Parishad, etc. And in Bengal, the great tradition of a semi-literate person also reading in his own language, reciting, etc. But it doesn't mean that you are proficient in that medium to pass the UPSC examination.
So the kind of efficiency and accuracy that is required, that is usually missing there.
And also there is always an excuse, I don't get books in this medium. It is not quite true. I mean, I don't want to give you a plug right now in this program, but I think BYJU'S does a wonderful job of preparing material in Hindi and in English. But if you think that you don't have to do anything, you can give them good material to read, but you can't write their answers for them.
Sir, we heard about this disengagement on the border between Indian troops and the Chinese troops. Do you see it as something going towards normalcy?
No, I don't think so at all. I think for one, I'm not a minority on this one can't trust the Chinese. So whatever assurances Chinese give today, they may back out of it tomorrow. Secondly, I'm still very apprehensive because the statement made by the defense minister, whom I hold in great respect, Rajnath Singh ji, is rather ambiguous. It says India and China have agreed to a simultaneous disengagement from the north and south bank of the Pangong Lake. Till yesterday, we were shouting from the rooftop that we have got strategic heights on the fingers of Pangong Lake, which gives us strategic advantage. Now, if we lose that, if we are vacating those posts, China is not at a loss at all. China is on its side of the LAC, what it says, would go back and come back whenever it wants to do that. It has succeeded in forcing India to deploy a large amount of troops there. And when we withdraw, and again there is a small item that in the month of January there was a skirmish in Sikkim border. There is an issue the Chinese have challenged our sovereignty over Arunachal. The Chinese can create so many pinpricks and go back on their statements. I would wait and watch.
Okay, so we should not rush to the conclusion.
We should not rush to the conclusion that normalcy will return very soon.
Thank you, sir. Sir, if we talk about this pandemic and climate change, the COVID-19 and climate change, my question is, what is the significance you see of WHO? Because it has been, it remained in controversy, and here also America pulled out of WHO, and conflicting claims and some accusations against WHO. How do you see the role of WHO post COVID-19 phase?
I think WHO did not credit itself very equitably and credibly during the COVID crisis. I think the allegations may not be true, but the hasty way they have said that we have concluded after a cursory examination in Wuhan right now that the virus did not escape from a lab but escaped from the animals to human species. I think it does appear that the WHO was acting under some kind of a diplomatic pressure, and the Americans had walked out, and Americans are the large contributors to the UN expenses. So unless the WHO's own administrative expenses are looked after, and China was looking after that, this is not going to be very credible. But at the same time, the world cannot do without WHO. There's only one health body which can globally coordinate the vaccine ratification programs, the vaccine rollout programs, and so on. But the point remains that, like most UN specialized agencies, WHO has very limited potency, if I may use the word, in terms of controlling a pandemic. It's the national sovereign governments which would buy the stocks of vaccine, decide what vaccines to use, and they would have different capabilities of having a rollout of inoculation. In India, fortunately, we have a very successful inoculation program, polio, smallpox eradication, and we have a regular inoculation postnatal in India. So we probably will do well with support from WHO.
So WHO should be there, even if it is not that much effective, but it has to be there.
It has to be there at the moment, and it has to probably mend its ways. There has to be more transparency in WHO.
Sir, this COVID-19 also led to more or massive plastic pollution and biomedical waste. Do you think India is ready or capable of handling this waste of this scale?
That's a difficult question to answer, because even before COVID, plastics in India play a very different role than they do in the rest of the world. People have plastic sheets to use as umbrellas or raincoats. They use it for roofings on their shanty hutments. People recycle plastic and collect it as garbage as a livelihood source. Our biodegradable garbage is not sorted out in liquid and medically potentially dangerous waste. So I think what happened during the COVID, everything else is like a war theatre. In an operation theatre in a battlefield, you don't think about sterilizing, you don't think about anesthesia, you think about amputation and saving a life. We will have to take a serious look about it, and the government is conscious of this, and the government has made efforts. Now you have see posters all over the place, segregate your garbage, and especially stricter conditions for hospitals, especially private hospitals, incinerators and so on. But our population is so large. But we still are in a slightly better position than the European countries or America, because they are so highly urbanized and so used to packaged stuff that they are generating more polluting waste and more biodegradable, hazardous toxic things than India would ever do.
Now, sir, coming back to the last segment, like a civil services aspirant, when he prepares for IAS, he will write this mains examination, and those who will appear in this personality test in 2021. What are common precautions or common suggestions as from you to them?
I think one question which most of them ask is, what should I wear? So the answer to that, the short answer and the long answer is this: you wear what you are comfortable in, but not casual. You can be informal but not casual. So you can't go dressed up in jeans and t-shirts. But if you have a conservative slacks, pants, pastel shaded shirt, you are comfortable in that, go in that. If you have never worn a tie, you never worn a suit, and you are feeling uncomfortable, you will be very, very uncomfortable. Dress according to the weather, have a haircut reasonably before time, preferably don't sport a beard. I should not say so, but if you are going for an interview, and unless you are a Sikh or a person for religious reasons who is keeping a beard, you should not have a shabby look at all. You should look well groomed. So it will add to your own confidence. The second thing is that don't worry about who's asking you what questions. Keep your eye contact with everybody evenly. Don't let your hands flay like a conductor's baton. And don't worry about a wrong answer, because the board is not there to pull you down. They are there to see how much you can cope with pressure. So you might have not answered very many questions to your own satisfaction, but the board thinks that you have handled the situation with aplomb, with confidence. So they are what in army they call officer-like qualities. It continues to an extent.
Thank you so very much, sir. And it was a real pleasure interacting with Padma Shri Professor Dr. Pushpesh Pant, sir. And hopefully it will help students clear their examination and provide them with a holistic approach towards civil services preparation. Thank you.